Greetings, everyone. It's so good to see you all gathered in this space. I'm the Reverend Jill Olds, the director of the Yale Youth Ministry Institute at Yale Divinity School. And the YMI is very pleased to welcome all of you to today's virtual gathering entitled Handing Down the Faith, Parents, Congregations, and Religious Socialization with Dr. Amy Adamczyk. This is our second gathering for this year's Lunch and Lab series, and we have people joining us from across the country, even some siblings from other regions of the world coming today. So whether this is your first event with us or we are well known to each other, we're so glad to be able to welcome you here. For our time today, Dr. Adamczyk will speak to us, and then we'll have a brief Q&A time at the end of her presentation. We ask that you remain muted throughout. You all know that drill, but we will be monitoring the chat window. So if you have a question, feel free to type it in there at any time. Our office has a great staff. I'd like to introduce them to you quickly and thank them for their work. The YMI falls under the purview of the Center for Continuing Education at Yale Divinity School. So we have Kelly Morrissey, the managing director of the Center for Continuing Ed, and we're blessed to have Megan Lukens, our communications coordinator. Thank you both for all you do and for who you are. If you are new to us, we invite you to peruse the Youth Ministry Institute's website when you get a chance, and that's yaleyouthministryinstitute.org, all one word. We have a whole array of resources on there. We have curricula for your youth, training modules for youth leaders. We have discussion forums. We have over 1,000 video clips and lectures given by leading youth ministry experts. We have resources for anti-racism work. We have resources for youth with mental health struggles. We have mission and outreach endeavors, links to other articles, basically the works. All of our offerings are for free on there, so please do check out that website. One final calendar note for us. If you're available, we would love to see you next month on Wednesday, November 8th at 12 p.m. At that time, we will welcome the Reverend Talitha Amadea Aho for a Zoom webinar. Reverend Aho is the author of the new book, In Deep Waters, Spiritual Care for Young People in a Climate Crisis. For those of you who are interested in environmental justice and how youth can become involved and advocate in that realm, that is going to be a do not miss. So please do register for that on our website. We would love to see you there. And for those looking for our next in-person gathering, that is going to be in the spring. So just sort of stay tuned for more details on that. They are coming. And now it is my great pleasure to introduce you all to Dr. Adamczyk. Amy Adamczyk is the professor of sociology at John Jay College of Criminal Justice and the programs of doctoral study in sociology and criminal justice at the Graduate Center, City University of New York. Trained as a sociologist of religion, her research focuses on how different contexts, nations, counties, friendship groups, and personal religious beliefs shape people's deviant, criminal, and health-related attitudes and behaviors. She received her Ph.D. in sociology from the Pennsylvania State University and holds MA degrees from the University of Chicago and the Graduate Center at Queens College, and completed her BA degree at Hunter College. She is the recipient of the 2018 Outstanding Book Award from the International Section of the Academy of Criminal Justice Sciences for a work called Public Opinion About Homosexuality, Examining Attitudes Across the Globe. Her co-authored book, Handing Down the Faith, How Parents Pass Their Religion On to the Next Generation, was a finalist in Christianity Today's 2022 Book of the Year Award in the Marriage and Family category. In addition to her 2 books, she has published over 50 peer-reviewed articles in well-regarded journals like the American Sociological Review, Social Forces, Social Science Research, and Justice Quarterly. Dr. Adamczyk, welcome. We are really glad to be able to have you here.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here. All right. So thank you so much for having me. I'm really thrilled to be here. You are the group of people that I want to be talking with. So thank you for taking some of your very precious time and spending it with me for today. All right. So today I'm going to be talking about my book, Handing Down the Faith. Great. Handing Down the Faith, How Parents Pass Religion On to the Next Generation. So I just had a really wonderful introduction. So I'm not going to say too much more about myself, but I can say this. I was trained as a sociologist of religion. A lot of my research tends to focus on issues or topics that might be considered quote unquote deviant or moral. The reason for this is because religion often has its greatest role in shaping views about these things. And so what do I mean by deviant behavior? I mean attitudes and issues and topics and behaviors for which there isn't always clear agreement about whether or not they are right or wrong. So things like same-sex relationships, abortion, underage drinking, marijuana use, premarital sex, extramarital sex. In a lot of my work, this is where I have found that religion has the greatest influence, because it's often people looking to try to figure out where their judgment should lie. And the acceptance of these things change over time and across spaces. So I'm a sociologist of religion. I'm currently working with the City University of New York, John Jay College of Criminal Justice, and the Graduate Center. If you don't know what the City University of New York is, it's the largest urban university in the country, in part because we're in the largest city in the country. We enroll about 300,000 students. We're a public university. We're a very good deal. If you come to New York City and you want to be a student, this is the place that you want to go to. I'm located in Midtown Manhattan. I'm at John Jay College of Criminal Justice. Again, I do a lot of work in deviance and crime and law and justice issues. And I'm in Midtown. There's many other colleges all around us. If you come to New York City and you want to work on a Ph.D., you would go to the Graduate Center, but we also have a medical school, a law school, and a variety of other things. So enough about me. Let me talk to you about this co-authored book that we had recently published. So the book has received a lot of attention, and that's been very exciting for both me and Chris Smith, who's the co-author on this book. It was a finalist, as Jill mentioned. It's been reviewed in a number of outlets. There have been several podcasts, television shows, and invited talks related to it. It's also been turned into an audiobook. So as a more traditional academic, being able to enter a space where other people outside of academia are very curious about these ideas has been really, really exciting. So during the discussion part of this presentation, I'm excited to hear more about your thoughts and what you found interesting, what you found exciting, what you already knew, what you didn't know. So hopefully we can talk a bit more about that. So today I'm going to be talking with you about 3 chapters, and it's the 3 chapters that I spent the vast majority of my time on when I was putting this book together. These are Chapter 2, Parent Religiousness, Parenting Styles and Intergenerational Religious Transmission, Chapter 6, on the influence of parents' experiences growing up, and then Chapter 7, which focuses on congregations. And of course, we've had a lot of curiosity from congregations and questions about what they might be able to do better and what parents use congregations for. So I'll talk about that as well. All right, so here's a little bit of a brief outline of how I'm going to be presenting the information to you today. So we're going to start by talking about the previous work and the data and methods in this area. Then I'll talk about parenting styles, and I'll talk about how parents thought about religious faith transmission. What were they trying to do? How were they trying to do it? I'll talk a little bit about congregations. I'll try to contextualize what it means to be a parent today, what's going on in the larger society that shapes how they view congregations and how they view religion more generally. And then I'll talk about, the things that parents found useful to congregations. And then finally, I'll end with a conclusion and discussion. So first up, why did we decide to do this research? So I've known Christian Smith for a long time, I think close to 20 years, and we've remained in touch ever since I was in graduate school. And we both had this similar interest in trying to understand the role of religion for young people. So my research, as I mentioned earlier, focuses a lot on quote unquote deviant things or, things that are more morally ambiguous. And certainly things like underage drinking and marijuana and premarital sex, that all falls into that category. And so I was always very curious about how young people's religious beliefs shape the likelihood that they would engage in these various behaviors. What is the role of the religious friendship context in which they were embedded? What is the role of their parents and their parents' religiosity in shaping these behaviors? And then Chris had been working a lot in this area and looking at how religious belief and formation develop amongst young people and where it landed them years later, 10 years later. And so he had done a big survey about the changes over young adulthood and the things that affected whether or not they would be more religious or less religious. And together, we knew a lot about young people. We had done a lot of survey research on young people, and we knew a lot about where they stood on this issue related to many of the interviews that we, and especially Chris and his team, had done. But when we started talking about this work a number of years ago, one piece that was just so clearly missing is, what is the role of parents? We had, for the most part, given relatively little attention to the role of parents. And we wanted to go back and talk to parents and say, hey, what do you think you're doing when you are trying to transmit religious belief? What does that look like? What are you envisioning? What do you think is happening? What's successful? What doesn't work? What are your concerns? And so what we did is we put together this study to try to understand where they were at. Now, things are a little bit different today. A lot of people have already begun to build off of this work that we did, and there had been a little bit of other research out there, not much though. And so we were, I don't want to say the first, but we were some of the first to really dig in and talk to parents about how they saw religion and passing it on to the young people in their lives. All right, so the foundation of the research that we did focused on a lot of interviews, over 250 interviews with mothers and fathers across the United States. You'll see the dots here on this map. That indicates where we went and found these parents. And I should say, too, that we were very lucky because part of our research team included people who knew Spanish and were willing to go to the southern part of the United States and interview people in Spanish, so parents in Spanish. And so we have a lot of interviews from people representative from a wide variety of different backgrounds. We interviewed parents from not just Christianity, but also Buddhism, Hinduism, Muslim parents. We talked to Mormon parents, Jehovah's Witnesses, Jewish parents. So we got a real good sense of how parents in America understand religious faith transmission. And the way we initially contacted these parents was through the congregations. So congregations would then, we contacted congregations, and then they told us, hey, I have some parents that I think you might want to talk to. They'd be a really good match for what you're trying to do. I should clarify too that because this was a study of how religion is transmitted across the generations, a lot of the parents in our sample are going to be more religious than the average. Now, I say all of that, but when we got to the end of our study initially, when we had 200 interviews, we decided that it'd be really smart of us to go back and talk to parents who were not religious at all, parents who were atheists or couldn't give a crap about religion. And so we tracked down about 20 additional interviews related to them. And I will say this, for the most part, many of the findings that we discovered are very similar across religious traditions and across parents who are more religious and less religious. So we found a lot of similarities. And I'm going to point out when we didn't find similarities, where there were some clear differences between different religious groups and denominations. So in addition to the interview data, and I should say it wasn't just Chris and I that did this, we had a whole research team that supported us throughout this process. We also had survey data. Now, we didn't collect the survey data ourselves. We didn't have to. We're very lucky to be in the United States, and there is a lot of survey data out there that researchers can get, that you can get with very, very easily. You can get this information. And so because there were so many surveys out there, we didn't actually have to collect a lot of our own data on religion. But the interviews were especially key because that was something to our knowledge, nobody had that information. So we combined the survey data with the interview data. Like I say, we talked to people all across different religions. There were some differences, and I'm going to mention those to you. And for the most part, those differences tended to be related to whether or not the parents belong to what we call strict religions. That's a term we use a lot in sociology of religion. But these are essentially religions that make a lot of demands on their adherents. It often includes conservative and Black Protestant churches. It includes Mormons. It includes Muslims. It doesn't include Catholics. For the most part, it wouldn't really be including mainline Protestants, including Episcopalians. There's some important differences between those groups. And I'll point out when we found differences in our data. Okay, so let's go ahead and dive into the findings. So one of the things that we noticed right away when we were talking to parents, and a lot of times the setup for these interviews is that I would interview the mother, Chris would interview the father, or we would have other team members at the same time would be interviewing the mothers and the fathers. I should say I interviewed LGBTQ individuals all across New York City, both partners. And one of the things that we found right away that came up repeatedly is that parents often reflected on their own experiences when they were young people. And they thought very much about how are they similar or different to their own parents? What is it that they liked about their own parents? And how was that going to then shape their relationship with their own kids? All right. So what are the similarities and differences between adult children and their parents in terms of their child rearing style? One of the things that we discovered, and I don't, sometimes as a social scientist, some of this stuff might seem sort of obvious. I don't know if this is stuff that you already know. If you don't already know it, we certainly found it in our research. But one of the things that was very clear is that parents who had been very close to their own parents growing up felt that they were very close to their own children now. And so, 76% of people who said that they were very close to their fathers felt very close to their children now. And 67% of people who were very close to their mothers felt that they were very close to their mothers now. And so you could clearly see that there is some transitioning or preferences. If they liked being close to their parents, it was something that they wanted for their own children as well. So the closeness tended to translate into feelings that their parents were a positive role model for parenting. And often adult children then wanted to emulate their parents' parenting for their own children. So here's just a little bit more data from one of the survey databases that we have here. This is indicating that 55% of people who say that they were, of people that say that they were very close to their fathers growing up, 55% of them said that was a positive role model, and that was something that they wanted to emulate with their own children. So you can see they're like, I like that, now I want to do that. All right. We find a very similar thing for mothers. We see that about 50% of the people who said that they were very close to their own mothers growing up then wanted to emulate it. You can notice here, if they were more distant, that wasn't something that they wanted to then emulate. So parents thought a lot about, what do I like? What did I like my parents? Did I like what they were doing? Is that what I want to do with my own children? So those things very much appeared throughout the survey data. It also appeared in the interviews. It was very clear when we started talking to the parents that this was important. So adult children who had a close and warm relationship with their own parents wanted to transmit similar values, beliefs, and traditions to their children. So this is a mother from the traditional Black Protestant church. She says, so just growing up in this type of close family environment and the structuring with God in our household has led me to believe that I'm going to do the same for my family. So very much thinking and reflecting on what it was like when they were growing up. Now, about 50% of the people we interview wanted to emulate their parents. And some of you may be thinking right now, there's no way in hell I'm going to emulate my parents. We found that as well. So we got about 50%, the other 50% of people did not want to emulate their parents. And so they're very much, again, you're reflecting on, what is it that you liked? Do you like your parents? And then hence, do you want to, use that same style as you move forward with your children? So here's someone from again, a mother from the Black Protestant church. My parents did not have the knowledge or education to direct me in the right direction, to be able to do something that I can absolutely say I love. It's important to me that we provide our children with more guidance. Here's a Jewish mother. I remember interviewing her here in New York City, and she said, I grew up with zero boundaries, zero. I had no bedtime. Nobody bathed me. Nobody said, you stink, go take a bath. I just don't know what the hell was happening because we're so attentive to our children. So parents very much thinking about how they were raised and what that then means for them to raise their own children and what that means specifically about religion. All right. So, if we're thinking about parents reflecting and then wanting to emulate or not emulate, what did they reflect on? What is it that they liked about their own parents, and what specifically did they want to change? So for the most part, there were two dominant themes. There's other themes that arose, and if you take a look at the book, you'll see them. One related to communication style, whether or not there were one-way or two-way conversations, and another one had to do with strictness and punishment. So let me unpack both of those. So first off, about 25% of the parents that we interviewed said that as children, they enjoyed genuine two-way conversations. So here's a Mormon mother. Again, this is somebody I interviewed. She said, my mother was a real scholar of the gospel. So we grew up talking about the gospel all the time. Hopefully, I'm leaving the same impression on my children. There was about 25% of parents who said that there was very little communication. So here's a Muslim father. He said, well, my religious views have not changed. I have conversations with my kids as opposed to my parents, where they just dragged us to the mosque. I want my kids to think more. So you can start to see here, like, what does this look like? So parents aren't even really talking much to the young people about religion. And then certainly the father is reflecting and saying, this is how I'm going to do it differently. And then we had 50% of parents, as you know, half of our sample, said that for the most part, there were one-way conversations. And I think this maybe is very common amongst many of us. When I say that my dad never spoke to me as a father, and he clears his throat, he spoke to me more as a pastor. The discussion would be, well, that's not what Christians believe, so that's wrong. So here you can see the dad is, telling his kid how it is. This is what's going on. All right. Versus a two-way conversation where maybe some of the information is coming from the children, like they have questions, and then the parents have to engage it in some way. The vast majority of the parents that I spoke to, or that we spoke to, they talked about wanting to have genuine two-way conversations with their kids. And so another example of this is I was interviewing a Jewish mom here in New York City, and she was telling me that her kid was really obsessed with dead bodies. And he wanted to talk about what happened to them, like the decaying of dead bodies. And so she told me, she goes, this isn't really something I want to discuss. It's not necessarily what I would put on the agenda, but this is important to him. And he's bringing this to me. And so I'm going to do my best to engage him and do my best to explain not just what physically happens to the dead bodies, but what we as from our particular religious background, feel about, what happens. And so you can see there, it's the two-way conversation that the kids are initiating things, maybe the parents are initiating things a little bit, but they're going back and forth. It's not just, let me tell you how it is, or this is how things are when you're of this religious faith. And that's what these parents really wanted to emulate. Another thing that parents talked a lot about was strictness. So strictness and punishment. 65% of parents told us that their parents had been strict with them. Some of them genuinely liked it. They said that was a good way of parenting, and that they wanted to emulate that. So here's a Black Protestant mother. She says, I think parents should whoop, not chastise a child, but whoop them. People all about, are we abusing them? But certainly I think that leads to being a better person. Here's a white Jewish mother. She was the opposite. She was, I was raised with everything so strict. There was no joy in everything. She said, everything seemed difficult and strict to the letter of the law. And then she said, her and her partner were now trying to make things enjoyable for their 3 sons. So parents very much were thinking about strictness and what to do with it. How does being raised in a strict environment shape later parenting styles? Again, this was something that we tried to unpack with our survey data. We wanted to know, okay, you were strict, you were raised in a strict environment when you were younger. How then does that affect your current parenting approach? And what we found in general is that strict parents are more successful at passing on strict parenting approaches. So if they had been raised in a strict household, they were more likely to pass that on. Conversely, if they had been raised in a more permissive household, some of those parents then moved into the strict category. So the group that wore, kind of won out was the stricter parents in general. Okay, so I'm going to transition, and I know something that a lot of organizations and groups and religious people want to try to understand is what's successful. What did we find that parents were doing, and that 10 years later was leading to these young people being extremely likely to say that religion is important. So we unpacked the survey data and tried to pour through it and say, okay, what seems to matter? And there's a lot of good reasons for why these various things matter. I think some of these things will be obvious. Some of these things might be like, oh, okay, I didn't really know that. But let me go ahead and go through it. I think the key thing to keep in mind is that there's a lot of overlap between these processes. So parents who say that religion is very important in their lives are also the same parents who are going to be attending religious services on a regular basis. When you see these factors, we've already accounted to the other effect. Okay, so these are independent influences that already take into consideration that there is a lot of overlap. So in some ways, these are kind of unique characteristics in shaping the likelihood that these young people will say that religious faith is extremely important to them 10 years from now. All right, so if you don't already know this, this is definitely good to know. I had mentioned strict religions earlier, and indeed, this is what we find. If the parents if the parents of the adult children, how do we say that? If you've grown up in a household where you were Mormon, Black Protestant, or conservative Protestant, your likelihood of saying that that religion is extremely important 10 years later is much higher than it is for parents or people who were raised in mainline Protestant, Catholic, and Jewish households. And I think for some of you, that definitely makes sense because you know where the biggest religious declines are happening. They're happening for Catholics and mainline Protestants. They're also happening for other groups, but not to the same extent. And so there you see the Mormons, the Black Protestants, and conservative Protestants are actually doing pretty well 10 years down the line. All right. Another thing that was very important in unpacking, I don't know if you want to call it success, but religious transmission 10 years later, was whether or not the families regularly discussed religion. And again, when those discussions occurred, and the most successful families tended to be talking about religion on a daily basis as opposed to a weekly basis or a monthly basis, when those conversations happened, again, those were two-way conversations. That's the parents talking to the young people raising up issues that the parents may or may not necessarily want to engage, but the parents running with it when it does come up. And we also found this may be less surprising, but of course, regular religious attendance, so weekly religious attendance, is having much more success than monthly religious attendance. And to some extent, that just shows the involvement of the parents, of the household in the religious organizations. When the parents take their religion seriously, the young people are going to be more likely to take it seriously as well. And so this is just kind of reinforcing that intuitive feeling that, being involved is really important. Additionally, when religion is extremely important, so if the parents say that, hey, religion is really important to us, this is a big deal for us, that translates to the young people. That translates 10 years down the line that they're still going to be saying, oh yeah, this is really important. If it's just very important or it's not important at all, no surprise, it's probably not going to have effect 10 years later. It's when it's at a higher level where it really makes a difference. And then finally, we went ahead and looked at parenting styles, and we did find some differences. We found that some things matter. So if parents had, and I'm going to unpack what these different styles are, but if parents had an authoritative parenting style as opposed to an authoritarian, a permissive, or a less engaged parenting style, that very much mattered. The authoritative parenting style is the one that won out. So what is an authoritative parenting style? And you'll have to think about, was this the one I had when I was growing up? I know which one I had growing up. And I think I would say it was the authoritative parenting style. But the authoritative parenting style is where parents mix kind of a demanding and strict demeanor with a lot of emotional warmth. And so there's clear boundaries for the children. The children know what they can and cannot do, and that there is going to be some sort of punishment or, scolding or redirection if they engage in behaviors they're not supposed to. But there's also going to be a lot of emotional warmth. These are the parents that are hugging their kids a lot. They're giving them a lot of affirmation. They're never going to withhold their affection. So even if the children screw up and do something they're not supposed to do, which is something, of course, always happens at some point. The parents are going to redirect them and let them know what the boundaries are, but they're never going to, withhold their love and comfort. And the children definitely know that they're cared for. The authoritarian style, this is going to be demanding and strict, but it tends to be more cold and distant. So these are the parents that are going to be less likely to hug their kids. The kids may feel like, oh, wow, if I violate the prescription, they really may not be very supportive of me. It's a colder space. Permissive, I talked to a lot of parents that were permissive. Some parents were even struggling with that. Here, there's lots of closeness and empathy, but there's not many boundaries and expectations. So the kids very much feel loved, and it's a fun environment to be in that household. But the boundaries aren't there. It's not always clear what is and is acceptable, and the rules maybe change, or they don't really exist, or they're not enforced. And then finally, passive. I would say passive is a little bit like not involved in the kids' lives very much. There's not much affection or warmth or clear expectations or standards. The parents might not know the young person's friends. They might not know what the teacher's name is. They might not know who the person is dating. So these are parents that are just a little bit checked out. And with regards to that, of course, that wasn't very successful for passing on religion all those years later. So again, authoritative style seems to be the most effective parenting style for passing on religious belief 10 years down the line. This is, mixing that strict parenting with this emotional warmth. These children know that they are deeply cared for. They also know that there's high standards, that there are rules, that you're going to get some sort of punishment if you go beyond them. But it's also filled with a lot of love. There's a lot of good reasons why this parenting style would lead to higher levels of religious belief 10 years later. Part of it has to do with the emotional warmth in this parenting style, whereby children really like their parents. They gave them lots of love and comfort, and they probably very much enjoyed that. And so 10 years down the line, if we think about religion and the parents were religious, the young people have a good feeling about that religion. At the same time, these are parents who had clear boundaries. They had standards. They said, you have to go to church. You have to, engage in family prayer, or you have to do these other things. And so these young people also learned, oh, I'm going to do these things. I'm actually going to carry out. I'm going to walk the walk that my parents are talking about. And so it's that mixture of both things. Wow, I like my parents. I want to do the things that they did. I maybe still like my parents, even though I'm into my 20s now. And at the same time, I did these things. I actually went to church, and I did choir, and I did these religious elements that were so important to my mom and dad. Okay, so what do parents want to pass on, and how do they want to pass them on? Okay, good question. All right. There were 3 things that kind of arose in these interviews that we analyzed. And I'm going to unpack each one of these. But the 3 things that were really important for parents is that they wanted to pass on a similar religion to the one in which they were raised. They wanted to pass on things like religious service attendance, prayer, singing in the choir. And then finally, and this was a big surprise to me, many parents we talked to only wanted to pass on moderate levels of religious belief. Moderate levels, not high levels. So let me unpack that. I'll start from the beginning here. So, okay. 80% of the adult children that we interviewed shared the same religious tradition as their parents. So here's a Catholic mother talking. So this is a lot, right? So this is pretty powerful. So they're sharing the same religious tradition. Now, I don't mean they're going to church all the time. I just mean that, they were raised Catholic, and they continue to identify and see themselves as Catholic. So here's a Catholic mother, and she says, my personality is loyal. Like, I've been with my company for 23 years. So that's how I am about my religion. It all goes back to the pleasing thing. I never want to let my parents down. And here's a Hispanic Catholic father. He says, when asked if he ever considered changing parishes, he said no, because it is the belief of my father and my mother. So most of the parents we interviewed weren't like, oh, let me go and sample Buddhism. I've never done that before, and see if I like it, and then I'll do that. No, they were like, you know what? I was raised Catholic, and that's the faith tradition I want to pass on. That's what we saw. Now, at the same time, none of the parents that we talked to felt so strongly about their religion that they would end their relationship with their child if their child wasn't that same religion. Okay. So it wasn't like, you were raised Muslim, and if you're not going to be Muslim anymore, I'm out of here, forget it. I've disowned you. I don't think we found a single parent who said that. That's just not, and I'll talk a little bit more about how parenting has changed over the generations here in just a minute, but that just wasn't a discourse we heard. Parents very much wanted to have a relationship with their adult children. They thought about that. And so they had these hopes that they were going to pass on their religion, but it wasn't a deal breaker by any stretch of the imagination. All right, so key practices that they wanted to pass on. All right, so we heard a lot about religious service attendance, prayer, singing in the choir. Many parents saw these things as laying a foundation for religiously inspired values and moral character. So they felt like engaging in these traditions was going to, one, improve the character of their children, the moral character of their children. They also thought that engaging in these things would just help their children more generally, all right? Might help them have more success in life, however that success was defined. It was sort of like, like you teach children how to ride a bike and you teach them how to read. Well, you know what? You give them religion as well. Like this was part of their quote unquote toolbox to help their children. So that, again, very interesting findings. So here's a Black Protestant father. He says, it wasn't like she was forcing us to go to church, but we just knew it was the right thing. And she did teach us teach the value in us. Church attendance is important because it's just right to have the value instilled in you, because that's something you want to pass on to your kids. And then here's a Black Protestant mother. She says, we always knew we were going to pass down our religious faith. It would be bad if religion wasn't in the household because we teach our kids to pray, to know right from wrong, and to know the Lord Jesus Christ. All right. So again, it was just important for parents to pass these behaviors on. It helped them lay their moral character. It also just more generally, they thought it would help their children. And then finally, the thing, like I said, was really surprising to me because I thought, isn't more religion just great? Like more and more and more? Like, isn't that the aim? No, it was not. We didn't see that much of that mentality. So many parents wanted to only pass down moderate levels of religious commitment. And so we would ask them, what are you doing? Why only moderate? Why don't you don't want your son or daughter to, maybe become a Catholic nun or a priest or a pastor or something like that? And the parents were sort of like, we just want them to have enough, like, so that it helps them. But too much might bring problems into their lives that might complicate their lives in ways that we don't want them to be hurt. We don't want them to be sad. We don't want them to have difficulties or challenges. So, too much, no, just the right amount to fit in, to get what they need, but not too much more than that. So here's a Catholic father, and he says, he was not expecting his children to say a lot of prayers or read scripture. Rather, he simply wanted them to just understand this is how we are. For others, they were pushing back against their upbringing. They said, we've never said to them, you have to be children. I think part of why I rebelled when I did, as far as the church was concerned, is that my parents basically said, you have to go no matter what. And so this, Catholic mothers said, well, we don't want too much because we also don't want to drive them away. We don't want it to lead them away from us. And again, parents very much want a relationship with their children today. So where we saw some variation of this was with parents from strict religions. So Mormons, Muslims, conservative, and Black Protestants were less interested in transmitting moderate religion. But even for quote unquote the more demanding religions, like say Muslim parents in America were very concerned about their kids becoming too religious and that then having problems for them. Again, they love their children a lot. They just don't want them to have lives that are going to be really difficult. And so some parents would say, I want them to be religious, but I don't want it to be so much that this is going to be a real problem for them. And so we certainly saw that with Muslims. We saw that with a lot of the other ones as well. But again, the moderate religion, very strong for Catholics, very strong for mainline Protestants, a little less so for some of the other groups. All right, so what was their strategy? Well, how do parents think about religious faith transmission? Well, how did they do it? How intentional were they? So we found about 60% of parents, were intentional, we call them, this is our term, intentional religious socializers. They're very deliberate in the process. And then we have about 13% who used osmosis. And then we had about 30% of parents who used a mixture of both. So let me unpack that a little bit for you so you have a better understanding what that is. So here's the intentional religious socializers. These are the parents who very much were very direct with their kids and told them, this is what we're going to do. This is how this is going to go. And so here's this Black Protestant father who was pretty funny. This was a Catholic mother, not a Black Protestant mother, Catholic mother. He says, oh no, she's coming to church, and laughs. My house, my rules. That's how my mom did it. That just like I was drugged to church, they were drugged. That's how I'm doing it. And then we had another Black Protestant father. I don't have the quote here, but I remember him telling me they had a drug problem on Sunday mornings. And it wasn't like what you were thinking. It's like they were going to be drugged to church. So that was the drug problem. So they talked about that. Like there's no ambiguity here. This is what you're doing. So, okay, that's intentional, very, very intentional about what they're doing. We had other parents talk about osmosis. I thought this was clever. This was smart. Maybe not something I had thought about, but definitely something you guys have thought about. So here's a Catholic father, and he says, growing up, one of my favorite memories was driving home from church. And there was this Irish radio program on NPR. And I do this with my kids today. And basically, I just let this Irish program play. And I guess it would critique the sermon. Maybe they went to a big church. And so they would critique the sermon that was recently delivered. And I just liked that to be playing and kind of indicating to the kids in a very passive way, hey, this is who we are. This is what we're doing. We're going to be listening to this radio station. We're Christian. I'm just indicating to them, but I'm not telling them, right? It's just happening in the house, in this case, in the car. We had another Black Protestant mother. Again, I thought this very clever, very thoughtful. She said, when I was a kid, my father would sit down stairs and read his Bible for hours. I would see that. Okay. Again, I'm not telling my kid you have to read, but I'm just going to show you this is how I am. So she now does this. So instead of reading her Bible, say in her bedroom, she does it in a public space. She does it on the dining room table or in the living room where she knows her kid can see. So again, that's osmosis. And then, about 30% of parents had a mixture of both. So they're thinking both about you're getting drugged to church, but then we're also going to put this radio station on in the background, and I'm going to read my Bible, in a place where you can see. So you can see I'm religious too, just like you. All right. So. Okay, many of the parents that we talked to were scared that their children would stray. This came up. So about 80% thought it was either natural or acceptable. So that's a lot of parents, all the parents, and not all, but okay, the vast majority of the parents. Most were unwilling to end the relationship over it. So again, the parents wanted a relationship with their kid. This was not going to be a deal breaker if their children left their religion, maybe in a way that I'm not sure was the case 100 years ago, but today it's not a deal breaker. They want a relationship with their kids. They're putting a lot of energy into it, and they don't want to end it. So how do parents handle straying? What did they tell us? A lot of them thought about their own parents, and they wanted to emulate their own parents. So they would have faith that their children would return. Some would force them to continue attending services. But some of them were scared of pushing them away. So here's a Catholic father, and he says, we never told them they had to believe, because I think that's part of why I rebelled. My parents said, this is what you're going to do. You're going to go to the church. And then he said, I don't want to do that. And so he rebelled for a long period of time. So parents are thinking very much about how do they not push their kids away, or what's going to happen if and when they do stray. Okay, so I'm going to summarize a little bit of this now, and then I'm going to move into congregations so you can get a better sense of how parents specifically saw congregations and how they work. So again, the adult children who we talked to, they were very close. If the adult children who were very close with their parents tended to self-report being close with their children now, and they wanted to emulate their style. So again, that self-reflective process was really important. The most successful parents were the ones who were more religious themselves. So again, I don't think parents are going to be very successful if they're not religious themselves. So that would be a little silly to expect that children 10 years from now are going to say religion is very important if they're not religious in your own household. And if the parents don't care or they're not involved, right? So the parents have to actually care and be involved and want to do this. They need to regularly talk with their children about religion. Again, two-way conversations, not one-way conversations. And we found that authoritative, that mixture of the strictness and the warmth, that parenting style seemed to make the biggest difference. All right. The most popular themes to emulate were communication styles. So that's, parents talked a lot about that. And also strictness and punishment was really important. Parents are thinking a lot about how to manage things when the children violate the boundaries that they have set. For the most part, parents wanted to transmit a similar religion and only moderate levels of religious belief in general. And again, they didn't want to cause their children problems down the line. And they used a mixture of approaches, so osmosis and also intentional approaches. All right, so let's go ahead and talk about congregations. I'll give you a little bit of background here. Some of this you might already know, but it was really fun when I was putting this chapter together to do a lot more research on the context of parenthood today. So parenthood today has changed drastically, and this, of course, has a lot of important implications for how parents think about transmitting religious belief. So there's been a rise in dual income households. So only about 25% of parents in 1960 were dual income households, but that has increased to 60% by about 2012. And the proportion of families where there's only the father is employed has decreased drastically. Also, the number or the proportion of two-parent households has been on the decline, with a rise in one-parent households. All right, so things are changing. So parents today, it sort of looks like they don't have a lot of time to spend with their kids, but that's not true. Despite these changes, or in spite of these changes, the amount of time parents spend with their children today has increased. It's as much today or more today than it was in 1965. Parents are spending enormous amounts with their kids, and the whole context of parenting has changed. So parents are very different than they were, certainly when I was growing up, certainly when they were when you were growing up. These parents today, a lot of times they want to spend gobs of time with their kids. They want to invest in their children. Often these parents have higher levels of education. They have kids later in life. All right. So it changes the child-rearing norms and values. They become much more child-centric. So it's very different if you're having a kid. I think my mom had me when she was about 23, my sister when she was 21. This was relatively normal at the time. And that's a very different life than if you have a kid in your 40s. So the norms have changed. If you have kids later in life, you often are having them very much by a very deliberate choice, and you put tons of energy and time into them. There's a lot more concern today about children's safety. I think that probably started with my generation when I was younger, but that's continued to increase. There's a lot less unstructured time. So there's tons of extracurricular activities. They've really proliferated. What that means is that parents often have to ferry their children to and from these activities. It's a big part of what they do. And during those commutes, they also have time to talk to their kids. And so that's a different that's just a very different context than it was, 40 years ago, even 20 years ago. All right. So then one of the things we asked parents is we said, okay, to what extent do you rely on congregations for religious faith transmission? Given the context of parenting today, you probably are not surprised to find that almost every single parent, I think every single parent, told us that congregations are not responsible for my child's religious faith development. It is up to me, and I use those congregations. So it's not their responsibility. They don't raise my kids. I raise my kid, and I want to be involved. So this was very interesting for us. So, and I think it has a lot of implications for congregations and how they help parents and how they can be useful to parents. So here's a mother from the Black church. She said, I think parents are more important because the kid needs to see you practicing what you say. They can see other people, but if their own parents are doing it, I think that's more effective. Here's a mainline Protestant father. He said, I feel like it starts at home. At home, my kids learned our prayers. It's not like they learned it in church. They came home. This is where a lot of that learning happened. Here's a Mormon dad. He says, I don't think congregation's sole purpose is to help us. Parents are not supposed to raise their kids, right? So again, almost no parents said that they largely relied on congregations. They're relying on themselves. They're very involved. They want to be involved. Okay, so why do parents rely on themselves so much? Aside from the larger context of what parenthood means today, they often felt comfortable talking about religion with their kids. And I'm going to unpack all of this. They questioned their own faith and sometimes had trouble reconciling inconsistencies. And often the congregation that they picked was based on very practical concerns. It wasn't necessarily the ideal congregation. So again, they're involved in religious faith transmission to a large extent because they're trying to manage these things. So let's talk about the first one. Parents felt relatively comfortable talking about their religion. So here's a mother with the traditional Black church. She said, we're very open about talking what happens to the body. To be absent from the body is to be present in God. So they understand that because I've talked to them about it. Here's a Jewish mother. She talked about, what happens around Passover and cleaning the house. She says, I'm doing this. They see me doing this, and hence I do it. They felt comfortable. So here's a mother from the Black church added, she purposely studies the Bible at home where her son can see her. This is in the bedroom again. And she said, I'm ready for his questions. If he has questions for me, I can answer them. So in general, parents felt relatively comfortable, but they struggled with their own faith. And so sometimes they didn't necessarily feel comfortable with just, pushing their, not that they're going to push them off, but, they wanted to be involved in what was happening in the congregation because they had questions. And so they wanted their hands in that pot so that they could have some control over it. So many of them, very much wanted to be a part of their children because of that. Let's see, I'll keep moving here. The final thing that I mentioned is just that parents were very practical about their congregations. So this is just a figure that I'm presenting that provides information on how much parents were commuting to get to their congregation. Some of the parents, were commuting very short distances. Some of them were commuting much longer distance. We often found longer distances for people who were part of religious minorities. So to get to mosques, to get to temples. But for the traditional Black church, they would go back to their original communities and worship. And then those commutes became very long. The point that I guess we are trying to make is just simply that parents are very practical about their congregation. Sometimes if the commuting got too long, they would pick a different congregation. So again, it's not like, oh, this has all of the things that I wanted, so it's perfect and you guys can just take over. It wasn't like that at all. It was more like, look, we're taking what we can get in the context of how we can get it. So here's a conservative Protestant father. He said, look, because we were driving 45 minutes each way, distance was an issue, and we found ourselves missing more than going. And we decided it was time to find a church that was local. We found a similar quote from a conservative Protestant father. He explained that when they first moved to the area, we had no idea where to go. So we looked one up. And again, they're just thinking in terms of distance, like, oh, is this a reasonable commute? If it's a reasonable commute, then we'll do it. So very practical about how they think about congregations. They may not be ideal, but they're good enough. If they're not ideal, the parents want to be involved. They want to see what's going on. They want to see what's being taught. They want to, be a part of that process and lead that process. I wanted to just point out that a lot of parents were quite satisfied with their congregation. And the parents that were the most satisfied were actually the ones with young children. So parents who had at least one child under age 18, in general, about 70% said that they were very satisfied with their congregation. So in general, parents are satisfied. So it's not like, they may not be finding the ideal congregation, but that doesn't mean that they're necessarily upset with it. It just may not be perfect. It just means they need to be involved and they're directing it, and they kind of have the reins for how things are going to move forward with religious faith transmission. Okay, so how are congregations useful? What do congregations do for parents? I think it's a great question. I think it's a question many of you are thinking about. Certainly, we have had this question a lot. So first off, parents were very happy with religious education. They talked about it as being very valuable. They appreciated that the nuts and bolts of religious education was provided. And religious education, they saw that as something that was formally taught through religious services or classes. Also, parents appreciated religious sermons and other religious instruction because it gave them a segue into talking with their children. So when the kids came back from Bible study or back from Sunday school, the parents could say, hey, what did you learn today? And then the kid would say, like, oh, I learned about, Jesus, or whatever the discussion was. And the parents could then, follow up on that. So it gave them a chance to talk to their kids. So that was useful for a lot of parents. Like, this has given me another segue into religion that I can then, bounce off of, which I appreciated. So they very much like that. So parents would say, and here's a mother from the traditional Black church, it's a place for them to get an extended lesson in God. Others said, we like the curriculum where the kids understand what the Trinity is. We had a Muslim mom. She said, I'm looking for the old school hardcore, where my children can take Quran lessons, for example. They take it at a local Islamic center. She really liked the person who led those lessons. So even though, parents were relatively comfortable with their own religion, but they weren't going to get necessarily into the nuts and bolts and the nitty gritty of the Trinity with their kids. It probably wasn't going to naturally arise. And they didn't feel so comfortable like, oh, they were going to necessarily lead the Bible lesson or whatever. They will talk to their kids, but they appreciated when congregations provided this instruction, this formal religious instruction. Now, I will say too, parents thought that congregations would also help to instill right and wrong. So they appreciated that. So the religious education provided a moral foundation. It gave them a moral compass. It helped them make better decisions. Again, parents want their children to have a good life. They don't want things to be too difficult for them. They want to help them. And again, this was something that kids could kind of take with them. Like, this is right and wrong. You can use this as your little personal compass, pull it out when you need it, put it back when you're done. That's often how they sort of saw this sort of stuff. So they did think that congregations helped to instill right and wrong. Let's see, I'm just keeping an eye on the time. I don't want to keep you guys too long. I'll go a little bit, I'll go ahead and finish this up. I do want to say there was a little bit of a gap in the importance that parents placed on formal religious instruction versus the importance they placed on formal religious instruction for their kids. So parents very much liked ministry for children, but they didn't see as valuable adult church or Sunday school classes, if that makes any sense. What this means is there's a gap between when their own children get done with their religious education, and if they don't think adult classes are important, there's going to be a big gap when they come back to the congregation with their own children again. So just an interesting point, something we talk a little bit about in the book, but I think something that congregations, I think you guys know this already, parents often come to the congregation when they have children, and then they leave when they graduate, right? They got all the information, they're all good, they graduated, now they can leave and come back again when you have kids. So there is that gap there. And we saw that as well in our interviews where, it was really important to have ministry for children, but then when they graduate, it was sort of like, oh, it's less important now. Didn't they get all the education? So something to think more about or contemplate on a bit more. Another thing that parents really loved about congregations, they made things fun. So more than half of the parents we interviewed told us that their children liked attending religion-related functions. This is a little surprise to me. I do a lot of work on religion, but I don't necessarily do a lot of work on congregations. It may not be a surprise to you. Young people like congregations. And Chris Smith found this in some of his earlier research. We found this in our interviews. The parents were like, yeah, our kids like going in general, right? And so it wasn't necessarily the struggle. I mean, we make jokes about being drugged to church. I'm sure it is for some people, but a lot of the parents didn't necessarily feel that way. So here's a Hispanic Catholic mother. She says she likes to be with her godmother a lot. She likes going to church. I had a Mormon mother tell me, she was telling me about her daughter would go at 6 a.m. every morning to do some religious stuff. And so I don't know, we had a lot of that. So children do like going. It's not that they don't. And some parents did skip religious services, and we asked them why are you not doing this? Again, this intensive parenting culture that we're in means that religious services compete with many other extracurricular activities that are happening. So the most popular reason they would skip services is because extracurricular activities were going on. And I would say, but I don't understand. You do them on Sunday? If I was talking to Christians, and then they would be like, oh yes, honey, this is how it goes. You go on Sunday. I didn't know that. Yeah. So today these activities are all different. Sundays, all the time, everywhere. Lots and lots of stuff scheduled on Sundays. And the parents are highly engaged with the children. They want them to participate even on Sunday. So hence maybe they have to make a choice about skipping services. All right. The parents we talked to were very happy that the congregations, not all of them, but some of them, were able to provide opportunities for their children to meet other children, because that helped them enjoy it. Okay. So the kids a lot of times did go, and to some extent, part of their enjoyment was seeing other young people there. They enjoyed that. They want to be with their friends. Their friends make it fun. The parents also liked that religious organizations could channel their children into friendship groups that they preferred. We also talked about romantic partners, and some of the parents were very explicit in saying that their religious organization needed to do more to find opportunities for their children to meet romantic partners. So I had a Mormon, was it Mormon? Yeah, a Mormon dad tell me, he said, you know what, this stinks. My son cannot find anybody at our congregation. It's just, there's nobody here. And so he's like, I told the leadership of my organizations, maybe we should link up with the local Muslim congregation, because at least they'd have the same values. We're all conservative, and he said they give him a hard time, but he said, what do you want me to do? My kid wants to date, get me someone he can date, So if congregations could provide this, that really helped. It also helped a lot of parents who said they felt like their kid thought it was weird, that church was weird, especially some of the quote unquote stricter religions. So if the parents could take the kid there and see other young people engaging in religion just like they were, that helped the parents. So the parents appreciated that when that arose. All right. Let's see. Okay. Also, the congregations offered a group of people that really cared for the children. So parents felt like, oh, there's a safe haven here. There was some place their kids could go to and get advice from another adult that wasn't them. And that was useful. They thought it was helpful that there were other religious families. I'll keep going through some of this. All right, let me start to wrap this up. So all in all, what we found is that parents have a lot of choice over whether they want to have children. Not all parents, obviously, not all parents, but a lot of the parents that we talked to were having kids later in life. They have great control over when they have children, how many children they have. They can handle it if something goes wrong. They're often having children because they very much want to have children. And they want to be involved in everything that they do, including extracurricular activities. They want their children to succeed, whatever success looks like. And part of that included having some sort of religious moral compass. And, parents felt relatively comfortable responding to questions that their children asked. And they often picked congregations for very practical reasons. So it wasn't like this is the best forever church ever to go to, but rather this is the best we can do. I'm going to use them. They're a tool for me to make this work. For a lot of parents, congregations provided religious education. It provided opportunities for parents to talk with their children about religion, test their knowledge, make sure they understood what was going on. They appreciated that congregations gave their children that knowledge, but then also gave them an opportunity to follow up and engage their children. They like it when congregations make things fun, when they have lots of activities. That was great. It helped them channel them into friendship groups, maybe relationships. That was very useful. They laid a moral foundation, provided people with a community of others, of mentors that were of a different age group, which was useful sometimes, that young people could go to. Their parents felt comfortable, like, oh, go to them and get advice. You don't want to get advice from me, but get it from another adult. And here's a way to do that. For some of our parents, especially those that were coming from minority religions, or certainly for the traditional Black church, their congregations were really useful for transmitting a shared culture and history. So the book talks more about that, and I can say some of that too, but often it was the congregation that was going to introduce them, in some cases even to, certain types of food or language or cultural things or ways of dressing. So the congregation could help them hold on to their cultural heritage to the extent possible. All right, concluding thoughts. So many factors shape parenting approaches to transmitting religion. Most important, we found across the board, it was parents thinking about how they had been raised and then reflecting on whether or not they enjoyed that and then adjusting accordingly. They were very deliberate. We didn't have too many parents who were just like, I don't know what I do. No, they sometimes had to think about it, but they were like, no, we do have a strategy for this. Adult children are not cultural dopes. They're not just blindly following, whatever happened when they were growing up. They very much reflect on that. They consider what they liked and they didn't like. Also, the world has changed. So I grew up, we had MTV. Some of you may have had MTV. That was the biggest concern. If you could get MTV, I didn't even have MTV at my house, but I wanted it. That's just not the concern today, right? It's social media. It's different things are arising that have complicated the extent to which people can emulate their parents. And so they are adjusting in those ways as well. The culture is just different. So they can't do the same things as they once had. So, and yeah, with that, I think let's go ahead and move into some discussion questions. I'd love to hear your thoughts and reflections. Let me know if there's anything I can help with or that I can clarify, and take a look at the book. It's available. If you want a specific chapter, just write me. I'll be happy to send it to you. Yeah, we can go from there. I'm going to stop sharing this.
Dr. Adamczyk, thank you so much for this. It was deeply rich, and there's so much we could pull from here. And folks, if you have questions, feel free to toss them up in the chat. But I have a few to get us started. And this one is a little bit, actually, it pertains to what you just ended with the differences in culture from when these parents who you interviewed were growing up versus how they're parenting their kids today. Do you see any disconnect between their upbringing and their children's as far as religious education is concerned? So, Sunday school does not look the same, although in some places I guess it still does, but it does not always look the same in my church context as it has back when I was growing up, or something along those lines. Are there any, were parents able to reflect on any differences in how religious education sort of intersected with the culture of the time?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I'd have to think a little bit more about that. My inclination is it wasn't huge, Jill. And I know it's very I know congregations are thinking about it in very sophisticated ways and so forth, but it was more like I think that, thoughtful parents would probably say something very similar 20 years ago in terms of how they use congregations, but maybe we didn't cover that level of detail. So we didn't have parents, for example, talking about engagement with Sunday school on social media or using those resources through the internet or something. They talked less about that and more about just the general thing of give us materials we can use or engage our kids, and then let me have an opportunity to ask them questions. It was kind of more of that general thing. And
That's
then just, go ahead, John.
No, you go ahead.
Well, and then just the culture just had changed so much. And I guess I knew that, but it talking to them, they're just the big thing was the iPad or the social media or when do we give them these things? And I will say too, Jill, we tried to make the people we tried to make it realistic for the parents. So I have a young son, he's 2. We didn't interview those parents, okay? Because right now, when you have a 2-year-old, you think that it's, it will be perfect. When they're 12, they'll always listen to me. Not that he even listens to me now. But we also didn't interview parents who had 30-year-old kids or something. We interviewed people, for the most part, who had kids between the ages of like 10, 11, and 18. And that was it. So we wanted them to be realistic about it. Like, we didn't want them to, I don't know, be thinking of some idyllic period that would come or had passed or something like that. So, yeah. Okay. Yeah. Please.
Yeah, no, that's very helpful. And actually some good questions in the chat coming up about sort of your interview process and whom you selected for interviewing. Questions about, did you also include pagan religions? Thank you for including atheists. And wondering about, you didn't quote any parents from mainline liberal backgrounds. Were they less likely to be interviewed, or how did that work?
No, I interviewed a bunch of them, especially in New York City. Yeah, so we did have a lot of mainline, very liberal parents. We had a lot of parents that belonged to a beautiful church in Brooklyn that is very inclusive of the LGBTQ community. So we did it, and definitely included them. We did not include the pagans, so I'm sorry about that. That's another book and another project. And like I said earlier, yes, we did do a lot with the atheists. I mean, some of our sexiest, most exciting quotes would sometimes come from the more conservative religions. So maybe that's why they didn't necessarily land in my PowerPoint slides. But we had quantitative survey data on all the parents, and we definitely were very deliberate in interviewing people from the mainline Protestant church, because when we found, we were also looking for differences across religious groups. And so we had to have those guys in there since that, they're such a big part of America. And we would sometimes find differences between the stricter churches and the less strict churches, but parents were often thinking in very similar ways. So it was interesting that there was nothing that made us throw on the brakes and be like, wait a minute, the Muslims are so different. It was like, no, they're kind of acting the same way as everyone else. They might, be trying a little harder than some of the other less strict groups, but the processes were the same.
That's absolutely fascinating. And actually had a question about the more liberal or progressive parents from those kinds of traditions versus the stricter religious upbringing. So I'm tying in some other anecdotal evidence that we've seen at the YMI, where we are hearing that a lot of parents don't always feel confident in having conversations about faith, especially the messier aspects of faith. Whereas you said that a lot of parents are very comfortable talking with their kids about faith. So it's very interesting. And I'm sort of wondering, okay, who's YMI's audience that we're getting that kind of feedback that's a little bit different from what you're sharing. So I'm wondering if there is a difference in that comfort level of using faith language with their kids, sort of depending upon what religiosity the participants were from.
Jill, I hear what you're saying. So I should clarify. Parents felt comfortable enough talking about religion, but they didn't necessarily feel comfortable talking about the nuts and bolts of religion, like the nitty gritty of scripture or the nitty gritty of some of this other stuff. It was more like, I can talk to them about, what Jesus is, or it was like the more general stuff, like be a good person, and this is what baptism is, or this is what that is. But they didn't, the nitty gritty and the nuts and bolts, they were like, hey, congregation over there, let us know, it was that sort of stuff. And they wanted to be very careful, because sometimes their values didn't always align with that of their congregation. So, if they were, and I do a lot of work on the LGBTQ community, so that's why I'm going to bring that up. But, especially parents, same-sex parents, they were very nervous if they weren't at a especially friendly LGBTQ congregations. Like, what are these people going to tell my kid? Are they going to tell them these terrible things? I need to keep my hand in this. We also had values today about abortion, right? Parents were like, okay, these are my values, but if they go to this organization, what are they going to say? And do I agree with that? That's why they were kind of like, I want to keep my hand in that and keep watching that and so forth. But I think if you said tell me about this specific scripture, the parents would be like, oh God, not that specific thing. Can you guys do that? Can you do that little religious training thing? Let us know when you're done. Make sure they get that down.
Yep. That's absolutely fascinating. So there was kind of a dance there, right? It sounds like of parents who wanted to have a hand in these things to transmit specific values that they held, but also did not necessarily feel super confident in being able to address all of the aspects of everything faith-wise themselves. Not that churches are able to do that either, but yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
All right, so really good questions in the chat. And folks, just an FYI, if we don't get to your question, I'm lucky enough to get a chance to spend some more time with Amy in an interview, and we will capture the chat and make sure that every question is addressed. But one question on here is sort of adjacent to what we've been talking about. Sophie asked, did you get any more insight into parents who expressed an interest in transmitting religious values to their kids, but who aren't actively religious themselves? So, they might not attend church, but they want their kids to have that moral upbringing or want them to be confirmed or whatever. And a lot of context, or Sophie's context is a place she's encountered that, and it's tricky to engage those folks. So, and I sort of have a general part two to that, which is, what I'm hearing a lot of, and I'll name a concern that I have as a church pastor. What I heard you say was that I found it fascinating what you shared about parents who want their kids to have some moderate level of faith, but not be too religious. I find that very interesting, and it makes me wonder, and it sounded like it was because we wanted them to be safe, right? That we want our children to have a measure of safety. We don't talk necessarily about safety when we're talking about, in my context, Jesus. That's a really different conversation and a really different place from which we derive leadership and value. So I'm very intrigued by that and just sort of wondering. So anyway, first Sophie's question, but would love to get to that part too as well.
Yeah, no, Sophie. So yeah, so we had kind of two different types of parents that fell into the category that you described. One was kind of clearly atheistic parents. So when we went after our last 20, when we were like, we need parents who don't give a crap about religion, or might even be like, religion is harmful to you. We wanted those parents because we really wanted to see what were the processes and how did that work. So we had that sort of set of group of parents where they were very much thinking about, we call it religious faith transmission, but maybe they talked about it in terms of value transmission or morality transmission or, the world vision transmission, so those were those parents. And then we had the other parents where, we did have some parents who were like, I'm doing this, but I'm not really buying it. I got the sense that sometimes if anything, they just wanted to pass on the tradition, not necessarily much of anything else. But I don't think they were especially religious growing up, but there was just this sense of this is, you're Catholic, this is a part of who you are. We find that a lot in Europe, right? If I study Italy and Spain and so forth, we find that the importance is kind of not necessarily anything else you're passing on, but you're going to pass on your religious affiliation, if nothing else. So we did see that. So Sophie, I don't know if that's what some of those parents were trying to get at, is just a very soft version of some loose religious affiliation, and then they're going in that direction. So I would love to talk to you more, Sophie. So definitely write me an email and we can better engage. And then Pastor Jill, so then the question then is, that's a great question. So a lot of parents were talking about, kind of using religion in this very safe, not too much religion, not too little religion, but then you have this contradiction with well, wait a minute, the whole point of the religion is that you really put yourself out there, that you really go the 9 yards. And that's what Jesus did. And isn't that what we're supposed to do? We're really supposed to stand up for people, and we're supposed to fight for what's right. And how do you balance those two things? I think that there was a time in our history where people did go more in that direction, in the direction of extreme is better. But the parents that I was talking to, they I don't know if that's the culture today, or we very much saw religion as just one more thing that parents should do. Now, not all parents were like that. There were some that were more devoted, but it was I think we talk about it as a personal accessory. It's just something you put in your pocketbook to have and to pull out later, not too much, not too little. So Yeah, I can appreciate that tension. And I think it was surprising to me because I just thought, oh, the more the better. So Jill, we have to talk more about that. And you've got to help me unpack that a little bit more. And what are y'all going to do? You know, that's my question for you, is how do you work with that? So
It's a fascinating observation, because if we are, the majority of the folks on this call care deeply about youth ministry, which at its root is about noting the belovedness within young people, noting that they are created with holiness inside of them, really regardless of what religion we all come from, and helping to channel them to become who they were created to be. So that's an interesting, and I'm not sure, safety is a really interesting thing. We talk in our churches a lot about having safe space. But at the YMI, we've also leaned into, I think, a more interesting conversation of brave space and what that looks like. And we've been challenged on that by some of our previous presenters. So it's very interesting to think through, those of us who work with youth, at least in my Christian context, might be working a little bit at cross purposes and in offering a different message to young people than what the parents say. I mean, I don't think they're totally at odds, but there is a sense of, passion matters, and passion doesn't always equate to safety. So it's just very interesting to me. Anyway, that's
can I just ask Jill, as a minister,
Yeah.
were your parents supportive of you moving in this direction, or were they hesitant that you went a little too far?
My parents were unfailingly supportive, but as one who felt a call to ministry as a youth, I had plenty of people say, yeah, you're just a passionate youth, you'll have time to kind of get out of that, right? Or you'll try it on for size and it'll be fun, right? But not taking the call seriously. So yeah, but I mean, yeah, but I think there is a sense of, we do care a lot about our children's safety, and as a mom, right, we care. I know that story, but it does call to mind. I remember being in a gathering with a very prominent pastor, whose daughter was expressing a call to ministry, and he was like, "You sure? Are you sure this is what you want to do?" Right? And there is a sense of that. But even if you don't go into ordained ministry, I think there is a conversation there to be had around, we want kids to be connected to the divine, wherever that takes them, and that doesn't guarantee that it's going to be simple, or moderate. I mean, we're not looking to raise fanatics, but we also want people to be invested. And there is most of us know many folks who raise their children in the church, they get confirmed or graduate, and we never see those folks again, where it was about a moral upbringing as opposed to a faith-based upbringing. So it's just an interesting, I hate using the word consumer, because I think we're all on different parts of the journey for faith, but I think that's a conversation. So anyway, okay. So someone here is saying, safety in, thank you, William, safety in congregational context is a code word for middle class values centered on success. I think I think that'll preach. So all right, enough about me. I have other questions for you though. So we have a few minutes left. So okay, here's a question. With parents, so there were some other questions along these lines in the chat, wondering about the years of your research and when you were doing these interviews. So what years were included in that span, and also wondering about a reporter's bias, perhaps, especially with parents who say, yeah, I was close to my parents, I'm close to my kids. Is there any sense of okay, do the kids agree with this? So just kind of wondering about that.
No, it's a great question. So a lot of the research was done right around 2015. So of course, things have changed. It was pre-COVID, if that's what you're asking. And the interviews today, a lot has changed as a researcher in terms of doing interviews. We do a lot more stuff like this, as opposed to in person. But I think all of my interviews were in person, as crazy as that sounds. So it was pre-COVID. I would say, I think we got moving in about 2015. It took us a couple of years. We had a big research team, 250 interviews, so it didn't go really fast. And we spent a lot of time coding. Some of the interviews lasted several hours. So we we think, I think we got a good sense of where the parents were at, and we definitely challenged them and followed up with them and picked away at what they said in the most in a non-aggressive manner, so they would continue the interview with us. At the same time, we didn't interview any of the kids, so we don't necessarily know, like, you know, okay, the parents are, you know, saying this, and then what happens. That being said, we already had a lot of information on the kids. We had several books on the kids. We, you know, I think maybe what the next project is, and we'll have to see, I'm trying to think if anybody from the team is doing this, but is to merge those two sets of data. It would be interesting to see. Now, we have kids with different parents and parents with different kids, so it's not necessarily the same group that we've all, you know, that Chris specifically has been interviewing for the last 20 years. But that might be the next thing, is like the, you know, the takeaway. When we did talk to the parents, though, we could say things like, well, do they go to church? How, you know, not just how they feel about church, but do you make them go to church? And, you know, we could try to, as best as we could, try to unravel, I don't know if you want to call it like validity, reliability, truthfulness, honesty. We tried to unpack it, but you are right. Like the parents are reporting on this. And at the same time, we tried to make it real for the parents. So we tried not to have them reflect on their child who's now 30, or in my case, your child who's 2, who's just going to do all the wonderful things in the world, and it's not realistic yet how this is ultimately going to look. So,
yeah, that makes so much sense. All right, last couple of minutes. This question has sort of come up in a couple different ways in the chat, and I had something similar written down too. So, some lack of surprise at seeing where there was high interest in Sunday school but low interest in adult formation, and sort of wondering about how to get parents, and I know this is a little bit farther, this is sort of a practical question as a result of the research, but thoughts on how we might get parents more involved and have a more participatory rather than sort of good luck stance with regards to involvement. So both infusing them with some adult formation, but also helping them be have a more active voice in their child's formation in the church. Might there be an opportunity there for churches?
Yeah. I mean, I would love to sit down and brainstorm with you guys a little bit more about this. You know, I have some practical or obvious considerations, but you guys are so smart. I don't know if I assume you've already thought of all these things. So, you know, one of the things that the parents and the kids liked was engaging in the religious services. So obviously congregations, even after that Sunday school moment is done, congregations can do a lot to make things fun for the young people and to engage the parents, telling the parents, you know, here's what we can do now. Because, you know, as you grow up, there's new issues that arise or new decisions. So figuring out ways that, you know, religion can be relevant to selecting colleges, or thinking about joining the military, or bigger life decisions, or you know, I don't know, crossways in life, you know, where you know, understanding, okay, your life is about to maybe take a turn depending on the decision that you make here. So figuring out how to be relevant for that older child population, young adult population. And I think that's what you're asking me, Jill, but you know, helping parents walk through that, as opposed to, not that anyone's doing this, but like, you're done, good luck, we'll see you when you have kids, you know. So I think there more could be said there. Go ahead, Jill.
Yeah, no, I mean, it dovetails, I think, with what you said about parents are looking for not the ideal congregation, but they're very practical in that choice. It's like you mentioned distance from house, which I get it. It makes sense. That's how I determine what activities my kids go to. I totally get it. At the same time, you know, encouraging them to perhaps have a role in, if the church is not LGBTQ affirming, right, and that matters to that particular parent, can there be a segue where there can be influence in curriculum or whatever, or in visioning work? So I think that's an interesting kind of conversation to have for parents.
And just to build on that, Jill, of course, young people today In some cases, they're just incredibly liberal. A lot of times younger people are more liberal in general than older people. So prepping the parents for, they're going to go and start to think about values and political parties, and they're going to be thinking about race and ethnicity and sexuality, and, you know, getting people ready for your next round of this is going to, you know, push parents in some very awkward directions. So, you know, if the church can help with that, maybe that could be relevant both to the parents, but also to the young people.
Yeah, yeah. This has been great, folks. We are actually at time, which is a bit of a bummer because this has been such a lovely conversation. It could go on, but if you have any other questions for Dr. Adamczyk, feel free to email her or email me. And we will be happy to try to incorporate those into our follow-up interview in a couple weeks. And this video will be out there for you shortly, and possibly also the slides as well. We'll have conversation about that and see what information we can get from there. But thank you for coming. Please keep in mind our next gathering, November 8th. And Dr. Adamczyk, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.